So my name is Karel. I'm 16 and I live in Australia, and this is my story. So here's a little of a backstory for me. My parents broke up when I was 4, and I used to see my father every second weekend, but I moved about 2 hours away from him, so I wasn't able to see him often anymore. So basically I had nowhere to go because the family home I had was about 2 hours away, so I was stuck with my mother and her now ex. So when I was 13 or 14, my mum met an old friend and they ended up getting together. My mother and I were living in Bendigo, which, just so you know, is about 1 hour and 40 minutes away from Melbourne. My mother ended up moving in with him, and he lived in Melbourne, which I hated. I never really liked him. I never really liked any of the guys my mum dated. All of the guys she dated were assholes. So basically, my mother does not have good choice in men. So this story is about my mother and her ex Chris. So one day, Chris and my mom had a fight. It was a Saturday, and after it happened, me and my mom went out for some lunch. When we came back, Chris had some music coming from my mother's radio, and he was drunk. And I don't mean a little drunk. I mean he was drunk off his head. So he started yelling at my mother. So at this point I had enough with the yelling and fighting. So I decided to go to a park nearby my house. I wanted to call my best friend, but I instead called him my father. My dad knows everything that's been happening between my mother and Chris, because I told him, obviously. So I call him and tell him that they're fighting again. We spoke for a while, but then I decided to go back home. When I got inside, my mother barricaded herself inside the spare room, and Chris was yelling at her, calling her every name under the sun, including a pedophile. Personally, I just wanted to punch him and make him pay, but I couldn't because he's way stronger than me, even though he was drunk and I'm quite strong for a 16-year-old girl. My mother ended up barricading me in the spare room, although I didn't like it because I just wanted to beat the shit out of him. At one point, Chris started banging on the door of the spare room, so I decided it would be a good idea to put a whole heap of boxes in the way of the door, but that did little to stop his fit of rage, because the boxes ended up sliding because the whole house had floorboards. As I was doing this, my mother was on the phone with my grandparents. She told them everything and they started driving down to Melbourne. About 10 minutes in, my mom also called the cops, but they didn't come the first time. What great cops we have in Australia, right? So my mother had to call them again, and this time they came, but it felt like we were waiting for hours. Chris ended up punching our glass door and cut his arm on the glass, which led to blood all over the house, and it honestly looked like a murder had taken place in my house. In the end, the cops came and took Chris away, and me and my mother haven't seen him since. But yet, my mother occasionally gets texts from him, which honestly annoys the crap out of me. So Chris, you fucking asshole, let's never meet again.